Hi, I'm Thann Bennett. Thank you for listening to The Equipped. Faith Radio podcasts are only possible because of your support. Thank you for giving and for sharing with a friend. The Department of War, multiple resigning prime ministers, and changing the rules. Hey friends, welcome into The Equipped. I am your host, Thann Bennett. Really grateful that you are here, and those are our three headline stories of the week. We will consider them in just a moment, but you know this drill. We don't turn our attention to headline news until we consider them through the lens of the true and the beautiful. We start with true, we end on beautiful. And friends, if that sounds different to you, if it sounds new to you, I'm so glad you're here. It is different. It is new. We decide intentionally to look at things in our world through a slightly countercultural way. We look at them through the lens of God's holy word. We stand on truth, then we consider headline news, and we close by posturing ourselves within the beauty of creation in order to impact our world, not for partisan gain or a particular worldview necessarily, except for we live for this common theme, glorifying the name and the fame of our Lord Jesus Christ. And of course, that means speaking into issues of our day, but it means doing so through the lens of Scripture, through the lens of truth with a capital T, and through the lens of the beauty of our God. And so if you want to be a part of that community, if that sounds like something that you want to experience as well, I invite you to visit theequippednewsletter.com. Check out some of our past archived episodes and issues, and enter your email address. Add your email address, get this content directly to your inbox each and every week, and I hope you'll be a part of this broadcast each week as well. So we will turn to headline news in just a moment, but we are going to start as we always do by standing on truth, and this week I have a question. Have you ever felt depleted? Do you currently feel depleted? That was the word that my doctor used when she looked at my blood work and other tests at a recent doctor's visit. She said, "You are depleted." And I wonder, have you ever felt depleted? That is right now on The True. Depleted. It was a one-word conclusion made by my doctor recently. Now, I will be quick to tell you the good news is there was not an underlying disease or an infection, and that was cause for rejoicing. I am very, very aware that many of you have either dealt with a diagnosis or an infection or one given to a family member or someone dear to you. And so I want to acknowledge that at the very outset, that when it comes to health issues or physical issues, there are far more serious issues than this. At the same time, it was anything but an all-clear signal. It was clear, and this was somewhat unsurprising because we've had a pretty chaotic couple of years. If you've been a regular listener to The Equipped, you know this, but our family has journeyed through some significant changes. We've adopted from foster care, which has been a beautiful thing, but also extremely trying. My wife, Brooke, lost her precious mother of a difficult diagnosis, of a cancer diagnosis. It was a painful last year of her life. That was a very trying thing, and it disrupted the rhythms that we had in our life. My wife had a lot more on her, and I ended up carrying a lot more things that we had originally thought that we would share, all while stepping away from a long-term career and building a business. So the bottom line was the demands on me were really, really intense for a sustained period of time, as was the stress and the anxiety. So this conclusion by my doctor was not surprising to me, and yet the evidence on paper from the blood work and the other tests that had been drawn was very clear and conclusive. I was depleted. I was completely out of gas. And I wonder this week if you can relate to that. Have you ever been, or are you now, just simply and totally depleted? Do you know, or are you maybe in that moment right now, what it means to come to the end of yourself and to be at the end of yourself and yet to look around and realize how much more is required of you. How much more is required of you even in things that you really want to give yourself to, your family, your friends, your loved ones. You know that more is required of you, but you are out of gas. I will tell you that can be a very overwhelming feeling. I would confess to you that I was overwhelmed in that moment. I was overwhelmed going in, but looking at the reality that the physical, that the numbers that reflected my physical reality showed that as well, that I was just completely out of gas. It was overwhelming because I knew there was still work to do. The Apostle Paul found himself in really this exact situation as he wrote to the church at Corinth in 2 Corinthians 1. Now, this is a very familiar passage to you, but I want you to listen to it in the context of what we're talking about today. This is the passage where Paul is encouraging his fellow believers to comfort each other as they share in the sufferings of Christ. But I want you to listen how Paul describes his own condition and that of what he calls his brother, Timothy. Here's what he says. He says, "We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt we had received the sentence of death." That's 2 Corinthians 1, 8 through 9. Great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, Paul and Timothy. We despaired of life itself. They'd lost the motivation to have a vibrant life. We felt we had received the sentence of death. It felt like that depletion was a permanent sentence over them. And my friends, I would tell you that was not just a spiritual lull for Paul and Timothy. These are great men of faith, but this is not just great men of faith expressing an emotional bump in their spiritual road. No, Paul and Timothy, they're out of gas. They are out of physical energy to carry on in their own strength, and in as much as it depends on them, this jig is up. They are, in a word, according to my doctor, they're depleted. They're done. They're out of gas. But Paul and Timothy knew it never did depend on them. They knew that it wasn't game over, it wasn't hopeless, and neither of those things were true because they knew that fulfilling the mission they had nothing to do with their own physical strength. I want you to listen to Paul's very straightforward and blunt response. In the very next breath, he said, "But this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God, who raises the dead." He felt dead, but he knew that he served a God who raised the dead. The very reason for Paul and Timothy's physical calamity was to ensure their dependence on God. And my friend, the same is true for me, and the same is true for you. You might feel as though you're under a sentence of death. And if that is true, I want to say to you from God's holy word, check this against God's holy word. This is not me. This is God speaking through his word to us. God's word is very clear on two things. Number one, your Creator can restore you physically, and he invites you to ask him for that healing. Exodus 15:26, "I am the Lord who heals you." But number two, your physical weakness is an invitation to lean on the raise the dead level power of your God. I will confess to you, my natural inclination is to just stubbornly push on. This is a default mode that I have, and I would tell you it is rooted in pride. I want to believe that if I just give a little bit more, I push a little bit harder, that'll make the difference, and if I push harder, I will prevail. But my prevailing was never the point, and neither is yours. Your mission, my friend, is that your God and the power of your God would be made real in your day and through you. That requires more strength than you have. It just does. It requires more strength than I have. And heeding to that reality, and the reality that doing it on your own will deplete you, Acknowledging that reality is the opposite of aborting the mission. Rather, your heeding of that reality allows the success of your life's mission to be carried fully, not partially, not assisted, to be carried fully by the awesome and all-sustaining power of your great God. You might feel depleted and left for dead today, and Exodus 15 reminds you He is the Lord. He can heal you. You should ask Him for that physical healing. But even in the absence of physical strength, even if you feel depleted and left for dead, take heart. Your God has the power to bring life from death. The True has me excited this week, not because I'm recovered. The truth is I'm still physically depleted. That is a diagnosis or a reality that is currently with me, and yet I know that in my depletion, my mighty God is on the move and He can work in and through me. The same is true for you. I want to turn our attention to headline news now. I'm going to move fairly quickly because I want to touch on all three of these stories this week. I think each one of them has an important component for us this week. Our first story is about the Department of War. You probably heard this, but the Department of Defense is no more. It has been replaced with, or maybe I should be more precise, it has been renamed the Department of War. Now, that name change, which was announced by U.S. President Donald Trump, it returns the nation's military department to its original name of the Department of War, and it used that moniker from 1789 to 1947. So for most of its history, this was the name of the department. The announcement didn't change any of the department's operations or its organization, but that new/old name, according to the president, better reflects the nation's posture of what he calls peace through strength and its commitment to, quote, fight and win as opposed to only defend. Now, the announcement came on an important week for the department because U.S. military resources and personnel are being deployed to the Caribbean amid rising tensions with Venezuela. The main flashpoint of these escalations was a U.S. strike on an alleged narcotics boat. Last week, it killed 11 people, allegedly drug cartel members in the business of shipping drugs into the United States. And so as we zoom out, as we always do, and try to consider these stories through the lens of the true and the beautiful, let's first do a little bit of analysis. Name change or not, no matter what you call the department, the policies and the actions of the U.S. military carry enormous consequence. It is the world's most powerful and sophisticated fighting force, and so its actions and even its posture are of immense importance. Now, most of the conversation around the name change, it's going to be partisan in nature, and the opinion of whether it's a good or a bad thing is almost always going to be tied to whether or not that person supports or opposes the president. I'm just going to tell you outright, that level of analysis has limited utility for us as Jesus followers. It just does, and by the way, I'll say this a lot of times, that is not because all partisan activity is bad. In fact, we talk about this a lot. The ability to have dissent and to have open debate is a hallmark of a free society. If you don't have that, oppression reigns and you don't have a multitude of counselors. So I'm not saying that partisan practice is always a bad thing. But in this analysis, it really does little good on the substance of the question about how to maximize the positive impact toward flourishing of the U.S. military. The actions in the Caribbean are a very prime real-world example of this truth. It is demonstrably true that the decisions of the U.S. government have the power of life and death around the world, and nowhere is that more true than when the U.S. government is acting through its military. And so much of this conversation is going to be politically motivated, but we should lift our dialogue on it and drill down to the real aspects of the department's posture and policies. We should really emphasize the substance rather than the partisan impact. 1 Peter 5:8 encourages us to be alert and of sober mind. Now, in context, that admonition is specifically saying it's a personal level, right? It's because the enemy of our soul is out to destroy us, and it says we need to be alert and of sober mind. But that guiding principle is also true for when we contemplate stories like this one. There is real danger in the world. It is real. This is a substantive story that merits our consideration. There is also real consequence for the use of the world's strongest military. And therefore, the policies of that military, they warrant our alertness and they warrant our sober contemplation. So as Jesus followers, as the equipped family, as we come to politics from all different perspectives, and as we even engage in some partisan activities and hopefully and prayerfully for the flourishing of all, that will happen. But on a story like this, let's be really focused in. Let's be alert and let's soberly contemplate the posture and the actions of our military. Hi, Faith Radio family. Thann Bennett here with a special invitation for you. So much in our world today is screaming for us to be consumed by fear and division and brokenness. But the promise of the gospel means that our foundation is secure. We should live not from a place of fear, but instead our lives should be marked with power and with love and with sound minds. And so every week I'm sending out the Equipped newsletter. Every issue opens with truth from God's Word. From that vantage point of truth, we look at a handful of current events in our world. We do it not to simply consume information, but we do it looking for opportunities for the gospel of Jesus Christ to inject love and healing and redemption into those who need it. We close every issue with a simple reminder of something that is beautiful in our world. I want to invite you to join our community. You can sign up at theequippednewsletter.com. That'll trigger an email back to you. Just click to confirm. Again, it's theequippednewsletter.com. I'll see you there. The prime ministers of two major countries are resigning. It is our second story of the week here on The Equipped, first in Japan. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is stepping down in the wake of his party, the Liberal Democratic Party's electoral defeat in July. An internal party election in that case will determine Ishiba's successor. That will happen soon. And then in France, Prime Minister François Bayrou is going to resign after the parliament took a vote of confidence and ousted him by a vote of 364 to 194. So it wasn't even close. The way it works in France is that the president, Emmanuel Macron, will appoint a new prime minister soon. That announcement is expected any day. I would tell you that just like our first story of the week, this is a story of consequence. Leaders of major nations in our world, like Japan and France, they have a material impact on the state of our world. The character of the leadership of major nations, the decisions of those leaders, they alter the circumstance for both those living underneath their authority, so living in Japan or France, and those living beyond their borders. It is one major reason that we take very seriously the biblical admonition in 1 Timothy 2 to pray for our leaders. But even as we take that seriously and we acknowledge that a story like this has consequence, we also understand that it is futile to completely trust in any government of men. Psalm 146, 3 through 5 says it this way: "Do not put your trust in princes, in human beings who cannot save. When their spirit departs, they return to the ground. On that very day, their plans come to nothing. Blessed are those whose help is in the God of Jacob, whose help is in the Lord their God." The main thing I want us to do with this story this week is to acknowledge there's a real tension here. You are a citizen of heaven, Philippians 3:20 and 21. You are also simultaneously an ambassador of Jesus Christ here on earth. 2 Corinthians 5:20 and the Great Commission tasks you with walking that out here on earth. There is a tension there. But I would tell you, you can only properly steward the latter, your ambassadorship here on earth, if your affections are firmly planted in the former. The one whose eyes are set on heaven, that one has the greatest impact here on earth. So this week, no matter who your prime minister is, no matter who your president is, no matter who your earthly king or leader is, allow your status as an eternal citizen of heaven. Allow that reality to inform the way in which you, to quote Jeremiah 29, seek the peace and prosperity of your city. You should be engaging on these stories of substance and consequence. But the way you do that for an eternal impact is to remember that your eternal citizenship is in heaven. The U.S. Senate is once again going to change the rules. It's our final story of the week here on The Equipped, and it is technically a change in Senate precedent rather than a change in the chamber's standing rules. But Republicans in the U.S. Senate are going to deploy what is known procedurally as the, quote, nuclear option, and they're going to do it to change the pace at which nominees can be confirmed. And in this case, it's going to be for executive nominees only, so nominees to serve in the executive branch, not nominees to the judicial branch, so federal judges. But they're going to do it to allow these nominees to be confirmed en bloc, which means a bunch of them all at once rather than one at a time. And so it will speed the pace at which those nominations can clear the U.S. Senate and will more rapidly fill up the administration. Now, there have been many changes to the process of the confirmation of both executive officials and judicial branch officials, judges, and those changes have happened under the majority leadership of both parties. Both parties have done this, and both parties have been making those changes in the direction of more rapidly approving nominees and making it more difficult for whoever is in the minority to block a given president's nominees. That has been true for both judicial and executive nominees. In this case, the change is only applying for now to the Senate precedent for executive nominees. So as we think about how to apply both truth and beauty to this story, we should start by acknowledging the constitutional authorities at play here. Really, there is no dispute here. There isn't anybody that is claiming that there isn't the constitutional authority for the Senate to do this. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 of the Constitution gives the U.S. Senate the power of advice and consent over these nominees. And Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2 gives both the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate the authority to determine the rules for its own chamber. So the House sets House rules, the Senate sets Senate rules, and nobody else has any say in that according to the Constitution. And so there's not a constitutional dispute here. Both parties have acknowledged that, and both parties in recent years have been exercising that authority to make changes that are like this and to make changes that speed along a president's nominee when that president is aligned politically with the current Senate majority. However, there is a lot of debate and disagreement about the prudence of these rule changes. So not the constitutionality, but the prudence of them. And I'll give you both perspectives here the best I can in one sentence. Supporters of a change like this say that the real-world impact of them is restoring the institution of the Senate to something closer to what has been the historical norm, which is that a sitting president gets great deference in making these nominations. Detractors of the move say that this is an evisceration of minority rights and that those minority rights are really critical for quelling the rule of a majority in a democratic republic like ours. And so those two positions on substance really clash with each other. But I would tell you quite candidly, the opinion of both parties really has depended on who controls the White House and the U.S. Senate. And those positions have pretty close to flip-flopped when their seats have changed. And so it's just something to be aware of. But you and I, as Jesus followers, we are going to find ourselves aligned with both positions in this debate at one time or another. We will find ourselves aligned with the majority party or with a pending nominee. We will at other times find ourselves not aligned with one or both of those things. And I would just tell you that regardless of your current status or your future status in those regards, you should seek a multitude of godly counselors. Proverbs 11:14. Granted, it should be godly counselors, but I would argue that it should come from multiple perspectives and multiple world experiences. I also think you should expect the same of your leaders. That will allow them to make greater choices. My friends, I ran out of time, but I don't want you to miss the beautiful this week, so head on over to theequippednewsletter.com because you're going to find an image of pincushions. And those pincushions are going to remind you about the beauty in your life and the importance of allowing your soul to drain well. I'm Thann Bennett. This is The Equipped. Thank you for being here, and I will talk to you again next week. Thank you for listening to this conversation from The Equipped. These conversations are available because of your support. Become a supporter now at myfaithradio.com. And please subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes, and share it with friends so together we can stay informed and be equipped to serve.